Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Brian Munson. I'm a principal with Vanderwall & Associates, and happy to be back in Point tonight to talk about the next step for the division section of the Targeted Area Master Plan process. Again, as we mentioned at the open house going on a little more than several months ago now, we've divided the division of the downtown into two segments simply because it's a lot of information to digest. So tonight we're going to be talking specifically about some of the initial recommendations and thoughts about the Division Street corridor, and this will be a open house format. So much like the last meeting where you heard me talk for a little while, I might have a few more words tonight because we've got a lot of ground to cover, but we'll be giving a presentation at the front end of the meeting, and then we'll have an opportunity to take a look at closer look at the exhibits and give us some feedback. So if you didn't get a chance, at the back table, we have clipboards and questionnaires. We'd like everybody to sign in and feel free to grab one of these and a pen, because we really do value the input we're gathering tonight along with the conversations we've had in the intervening months, because while having grown up in Point, I know the area well. I don't live here on a day-to-day basis, and you all do. So that gives you information that we want to help inform our decisions and our recommendations. So we appreciate you being here tonight to help out with this process, and appreciate the comments you may have. And so certainly feel free to both circle where necessary or add additional comments. We will collect all of these and share them back with the city, so we do appreciate anything you can offer. So with that, what I'd like to do is take about 15-20 minutes to walk through the initial recommendations and discussion points for discussion tonight. As you note, around the room there are 4 different kind of distinct sections, and those relate back to sections of the corridor. And as I walk through these, please bear that in mind. There's different recommendations for different sections of the corridor as it responds to the surroundings. So we will go through an overview tonight, and then feel free to walk over and take a look at the boards and fill out your questionnaires after that. With me tonight as well, Dan Johns and Scott Harrington, two principal and associate working with me on the project. We'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So we'll kind of roam around after the presentation and answer questions that way. So with that, let's move into the presentation for tonight. And it really starts with, why are we even doing this? What role does the planning for the Division Street corridor have in relationship to the community as a whole? And it's really taking the best of what is today and finding ways to expand and build upon it for the future. Because cities are not a static thing. Cities have to evolve and change in response to economics, to housing needs, to needs of its citizens, and needs of the future employers. So there's a variety of different ways that the planning for the future growth of the city will lead to a successful integration towards the future economies. Because what we found throughout the country is that cities that stay still begin to fade and are passed by. Cities that reinvent themselves, build off of the assets they already have, and find ways to get new vibrancy, become places where people want to move to, want to live, want to attend school, want to have their jobs, and want to call home. And so as we move into this process, it's with an eye towards how do we create additional activities within each of these areas. The other aspect about this is it's going to be tough, it's going to take time. That's why we're here tonight, both to share information, but also to gather information, because successful projects that take time require public buy-in. The fastest way for a project to go nowhere is for the public to oppose it. The best way to move it forward is to build support throughout. And so tonight and in the future, what we're looking to do is to build public and private buy-in for the directions that this process will take so that we have a successful outcome. Underlying that successful outcome are 3 key guiding principles that we bring to projects, and as we look at these throughout communities, successful communities throughout the country, they kind of have these 3 aspects in mind. The first is resiliency. The market today is not the market tomorrow. The jobs today will not be the jobs of the future. Successful cities find ways to diversify their employment base and are constantly looking for opportunities to attract new employees by supplying diversity of jobs, diversity of housing, and maintaining strong educational components. Vibrancy is another key guiding principle. Vibrant and active communities give places for people to interact, not just inside the home or at work, but third spaces throughout their community, places to gather, meet their neighbors, and build community. So creating opportunities for entertainment and recreational destinations, building upon the assets of the river, the downtown, Division Street, and the campus, and finding ways to develop and foster activity centers is key to build upon Point's unique assets. Diversity is another component, in that one size certainly doesn't fit all. And that's not demographics, that's economics, that's jobs, that's what are people looking for at different stages in their life. And they're all going to be different. Successful cities find ways to support and attract housing diversity, employee diversity, student diversity, and build upon that activity level so that people can find, no matter what their stage in life is, people will find ways to find Point home. So as we look at all of these areas, trying to find ways to diversify the retail environment, the housing environment, and the jobs environment is an important component to making these successful areas into the future. So, how do we bridge those big picture ideas and land them on Division Street? Well, first off, we listen. These are some of the comments that came out of the first public listening session, and that is, North Division Street should be where people are welcomed and come into the community. It's a key gateway and it should supply opportunities for destination restaurants, hotels, housing, etc. A lot of different people are looking for different things along this corridor. We heard many different proposals for different specific uses that could occur on this proposal, but the net effect is people are looking for different things with different formats, and so we need to supply opportunities for those to occur within this corridor to be successful. Biking and walking on several of the comments, rose to the top as key aspects that are lacking in this corridor. Currently, we have a corridor that is very auto-oriented, moves traffic north-south very effectively, but divides. Division Street's a key name because it does divide east-west neighborhoods, the campus, the schools, Century, and some of the other assets such as Smeekley Reserve from easy access to the community. Big ideas. And again, these are comments we heard from the public input session, but draw campus out onto Division. You'll see comments about that in some of the designs here tonight. The idea that Division Street can be the front door for not just the community, but also the campus is certainly not one that's reflected in the format that's there today. So, how do we span that community gateway and campus entry, and how do we bring that into the corridor itself? Effectively, Division Street is set up in three distinct characteristics. And as you move from north to south, effectively, as soon as you get off the highway till you get to about Maria, there is a much different type of development along the corridor. There's different characteristics, and there is a different environment. Crossing Maria and headed south to 4th is another key gateway and character area, where you now have single-use, single-story, suburban commercial uses that used to serve this when this was Highway 51, when this was the interstate that went through town. Both of these areas suffer from the fact that those uses have largely passed them by. A lot of those uses have relocated elsewhere, either closer to the interstate in other locations in other communities, or simply don't exist anymore because of changes in the economy. South of 4th Street, you've now entered into the heart of the community in that you now have front doors, porches, and houses, a much different configuration than you see in the other two segments. So, those three segments have led us to kind of divide the corridor and make recommendations that respond to that, again, through the basis of the guiding principles of finding ways to diversify what Division Street is, open up opportunities for additional housing and additional retail, while addressing some of the vibrancy and community aspects that this gateway could be. The first section is the community gateway, and again, this is as soon as you get off the interstate and head to 4th. This corridor, as you get to the roundabout at North Point, is significantly different than it used to be. If you think back to the days of the Holodome and forecast now to the Century building flanking both sides of this intersection, it is a drastically different employment entry point than it used to be. But as you continue south and move towards the existing development along this corridor before 4th, a lot of things haven't changed. This is still largely an auto-oriented area. It's still largely a large cross-section. It is still dominated by large format uses. And quite honestly, some of that is okay. because in every community there is demand for those kind of uses, hotels and larger format commercial and retail. So how do we find ways to make those aesthetically functional and improve the functionality and circulation of this area? As we step down into this area, we see large areas of underutilized lands or lands that can be redeveloped, repositioned, and reinvested in. And that spans both sides. But we also see assets that are beneficial. So as I mentioned, Century, the presence of the Triggs grocery store, and some other commercial uses still form a functional piece of the community that needs to have a location. But we can certainly do better than a highway cross-section. In this quarter, our recommendation is really focusing on how do we take what is the feeling that you left a highway and got on another highway, and rather you've left a highway and you've gotten into a quarter that begins to approach the community. This is not an area where we're recommending that buildings come right up to the right-of-way or drastically change the environment that the economy is supporting here. But we do recommend that you look at this as an opportunity to recast this entry sequence, so that as you come through this corridor, opportunities for art within new median landscapes, correcting the disjointed pedestrian environment by placing opportunities for multi-use paths on the west and east side of the corridor, as well as enhancing community signage and gateway functions, such that the future development has a more aesthetic approach, a more connected approach, and a more functional aspect to it than it does today. This could take the form of renewed retail uses that serve the region and beyond. It could take the form of new employment uses, such as what's already begun with the Century improvements. But largely, we'd be looking at aesthetic improvements so that we would transition from that highway corridor and begin to step down in travel speeds and in character until we approach the next segment of this project. Again, as you approach Maria, significant changes to the corridor begin to occur. We've gone from areas that are largely underutilized and in need of reinvestment to areas that have a lot of development on it, albeit in a very suburban format. We've also transitioned from a very wide cross-section street to now a 4-lane plus turn lane, slightly more urban, but still incredibly suburban cross-section. And again, this is a use that serves the region, but to a large extent, the economy has begun to pass it by. The age of Amazon is changing the retail components of retailers throughout the country. And so what you see is a format that was designed when there was large amounts of traffic, and this is the only north-south way through town. We no longer have that. The highway has long bypassed this corridor, and this is an opportunity area to really create a new living room for the campus and for the neighborhood to the west by bridging the divide in several different ways. First is a recommendation to transition this from a suburban format to a more mixed-use urban format. The simplest way to put it is over time, and again, this is going to take time, transition from buildings behind parking lots to buildings that front out to the street with parking lots behind. Transition from single-use one-story buildings to mixed-use vertical buildings, incorporating opportunities for additional employment, additional housing, and additional retail that is of a community scale. This will be very different in the future from what is today dominated by cars, but really will focus on opportunities to knit back the community on both sides of Division Street, make crossing east-west possible again, slow down the traffic, and create activity zones and nodes throughout the corridor. Again, to look at the cross-section, we have largely a suburban format. The challenge is, how do we get there? This is certainly a corridor that's going to have to adapt over time, and the first stage would be to look at the aesthetics within the curb. So taking this and remaining the 4-lane cross-section, but instead of the turn lane, looking to incorporate a center median. So again, further breaking down the scale of this corridor to create a transitional corridor from 4th to Maria that will begin to slow traffic down and acknowledge that you've entered into the city. In the future, as the parcels alongside it develop, it again begin to transition from auto-oriented uses to mixed-use urban uses, we begin to see buildings that come closer up to the street, and it gives us opportunities to then move the revitalization of Division Street from the curb all the way out to the right-of-way, and looking at opportunities to incorporate additional pedestrian facilities, landscaping, signage, and gathering points so that this street transitions from solely serving vehicle movement to an environment where walking north-south along the corridor could be a pleasant experience. This could have different forms. You could have urban cross sections, you could have grass, you could have bike paths off streets, and you could have sidewalks. It really comes down to the need to look at the format of the adjoining properties, the format of the adjoining uses, and reformat them into a more urban environment, such that pictures such as this are possible on corridors that used to look a lot like Division Street. You can have buildings in 2- and 3-story scale that create space where people would want to gather. You can even work with Starbucks and other retail tenants to adapt what they're doing to fit within mixed-use buildings and create opportunities along this corridor. Then we begin the transition point from 4th to the south. Here we begin to significantly change the scale and characteristics of this street from one that's serving the campus and the community to the community itself. And so as we begin to go south from 4th, we're looking at opportunities to enhance the environment while putting this cross-section on a road diet. Effectively, the 4-lane travel pattern here could be transitioned to a 2-lane with turn lanes to accommodate opportunities for additional pedestrian environments and enhancements that would support the adjoining properties. Right now, this is a corridor that if you walk down the sidewalk, you're roughly 6 inches to 2 feet off the curb and off the travel lane, which is not a very inviting environment for pedestrians, and it's even harder to live along it. By looking at this cross-section and reducing the number of travel lanes at the same time as we invite the campus to come out to Division Street, and we create sidewalks that buffer the traffic movements so pedestrians can begin to move north-south, we can move from largely moving cars in a very tight right-of-way to something that could still accommodate the vehicular movements and could still create the aesthetics that the community is looking for in terms of transitioning from a retail environment to a neighborhood environment. Now, this cross-section would not be the only cross-section. Certainly, it would have to adapt. You'd have areas where you may be able to incorporate islands. You may have areas where you'd have to have turn lanes. As you approach Clark and Main, the number of lanes could flex in and out as well. So this transitions across the whole corridor, and by no means is this intended to be the cross-section for the entire stretch all the way down to Plover, because it will have to adapt. Just like we've adapted across this corridor study, we would need to adapt in response to the adjoining land use. But the net goal here is to slow traffic and signalize that you've entered the heart of the community and that it should respond to the land use, not the need to push as many cars through as fast as possible. One of the other aspects that this area seeks to do is to celebrate the fact that we have a great institution with campus. One that, if you were to approach campus from Main Street, the feel of the environment around it, where the community completely embraces Old Main, is entirely different than the environment if you entered from Division Street. Right now, you can go right past campus, and if you didn't really know, you might not. So the idea of finding opportunities to celebrate the campus and bring it out to Division Street includes looking at opportunities for signage and monuments, but also looks at ways to redevelop the parcels. This is an illustration of the properties north of 4th along Division and illustrate one potential solution. This is not intended to be, this is exactly how it's going to be built, but this illustrates the simple fact that the format of the buildings, the density of the use, and the design of the streetscape go hand in hand to transition what is currently a very auto-oriented street to what could be a much more vibrant and active pedestrian environment. And this is an environment that could serve as a template to open up access to campus. So this is looking down 4th Street towards campus, a new building on the left, perhaps the existing buildings on the right. But the idea that we want to open up and embrace campus out to Division Street because it can be a front door for campus just as this is a front door to the community. But we need to look at how the buildings relate to the street. We need to look at how the street is designed. And we need to really help create that opportunity to have activities that speak to the people who live here, not just the people who drive through this corridor. In the future, that could be expanded south and north. But we really see the node at 4th as an opportunity to begin this process to help recraft and redirect Division Street away from auto only and into a much more mixed use process. So, as I said, tonight is not about listening to me talk through all the various talking points. Our goal tonight is to be a gate check. So what we would like you to do is to build upon the input from the last presentation we had, where we spent even less time talking and more time listening. And we would like you to take your clipboards and move around and see the different exhibits up close. Because one of the challenges of a project like this is there are a multitude of details that matter, but they're very hard to get through all of them in a presentation format. So what we would like you to do is to move amongst the various stations. And again, each station and boards are numbered as they relate to questions. So we have an opportunity for you to give us some additional feedback, circle and respond back to the questions, add more comments. If you need more paper, we've got more clipboards. And if you don't have a pen, we certainly have those as well. During the open house section, please feel free to comment as much or as little as you want. Our goal tonight is to be here to answer any questions you might have, so the three of us will be walking around the room and able to answer any questions you might have about some of the details. But again, our goal tonight is to listen as well, so please feel free to give us as much feedback as you can. Once you're complete with your feedback, you're welcome then to depart. We appreciate you taking your time tonight and want to thank you one more time for helping as we begin to look at what the future holds for Division Street, because it's not just a corridor. It's part of the community, and it is part of how people experience the community, and it can be an asset that could help diversify what the campus has, what the neighborhoods have, and reposition the community for future growth. So thank you, and please feel free to ask us any questions you have as we move around the room.